Our free housemaid useful after all. My daughter-in-law Brittany laughed as she pointed her phone at me from across the dining room, while I stood there, holding a stack of greasy dinner plates against my chest. The video light was on. My son Daniel looked down at his phone, smirked, and tapped the screen with his thumb before muttering, "That's actually pretty funny." Everyone around the table gave those stiff little uncomfortable laughs people use when they know something cruel just happened, but nobody wants to be the first person to say it out loud. I remember staring at the mashed potatoes crusted onto one of the white ceramic plates and realizing something cold and final inside me had quietly broken. Before I tell you what happened after that night, I just want to say this. If this story truly resonates with you, maybe take a second to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. I always read those comments late at night with a cup of tea beside me, and they remind me that people all over the world know what it feels like to give too much of themselves to the wrong people. My name is Evelyn Parker. I'm 67 years old, and this was the night I finally realized my family no longer saw me as a mother. They saw me as part of the household staff. And if you stay with me until the end of this story, maybe you'll understand the real lesson I learned far too late. Because what Brittany and Daniel still didn't understand that night was that almost everything in that house quietly ran through me. It was a warm Thursday evening in Charleston, South Carolina, the kind where the humidity fogs up the kitchen windows after dinner. The smell of garlic butter and roasted chicken still hung in the air while everyone drifted away from the table one by one. My granddaughter Emma ran upstairs with her tablet. Little Lucas left sticky fingerprints all over the refrigerator door. Brittany leaned back in her chair, sipping white wine while scrolling through her phone. And like always, I stayed behind to clean. I scraped half-eaten food into the trash, stacked glasses into the sink, wiped barbecue sauce off the oak table I'd paid for 3 Christmases ago, and listened to the low murmur of the television from the family room. Nobody asked me to help anymore because nobody had to. Somewhere along the way, it had simply become expected. Brittany suddenly held up her phone toward me and said, "Wait. Mom. Stand there for a second." I looked over, confused. "Why?" I asked quietly. She grinned without looking up from the screen. "Relax. It's just for Instagram." Daniel chuckled from the living room couch. "Mom's gonna go viral." I gave a small smile that didn't quite reach my face and went back to wiping the table. About 20 minutes later, after the kitchen finally fell quiet, I carried my mug of chamomile tea upstairs to the little guest suite above the garage where I'd been staying for almost 2 years. The room was small but neat. A twin bed, a reading lamp, one framed photo of my late husband Robert fishing on Lake Murray back in 1998. I sat down slowly at the edge of the bed and opened Facebook on my iPad. Brittany had already posted the video. There I was in the background clearing plates while everyone else laughed and relaxed. The caption read, "Our free housemaid, useful after all." My chest tightened when I saw the reactions underneath. Laughing emojis. Comments from her friends. One woman wrote, "Wish my mother-in-law came with maid service." Then I saw Daniel's name. He'd reacted with the crying, laughing emoji. Just one click. That was all it took. I stared at that little yellow face longer than I probably should have. Then I noticed something else underneath the post that made my stomach slowly drop. Brittany had tagged the location of the house. And mixed between the laughing comments was one reply from a man I didn't recognize that simply said, "Wait, isn't this the same property tied to the Parker estate?" I barely slept that night. The old air conditioner rattled softly in the corner of my room, while the glow from my iPad sat on the blanket beside me like something alive. I kept staring at that strange comment under Brittany's post. Is this the same property tied to the Parker estate? Most people would have scrolled right past it. But my stomach tightened the second I read those words because almost nobody outside the family even knew the estate existed anymore. Robert had spent years making sure of that. I slowly locked the screen and looked around the little guest suite I had convinced myself was temporary. 2 years earlier, Daniel had stood in my old Charleston townhouse, holding moving boxes, while promising me this arrangement would only last a few months. "Mom, just until we get back on our feet," he had said while carrying my winter coats upstairs. Brittany stood behind him, smiling politely with Emma balanced on her hip. "The kids would love having Grandma close," she added warmly. Back then, I believed her. I had sold my townhouse 6 months after Robert passed away because the silence inside it had become unbearable. Every room carried memories of him. His coffee mug near the sink, his gardening gloves by the back porch, the dent in the couch cushion where he used to sit watching baseball games every Sunday afternoon. Daniel told me moving in together made financial sense for everyone. At first, it really did feel like family. Emma used to crawl into my lap every morning while I made blueberry pancakes. Lucas was still in diapers back then and would waddle into the kitchen dragging his stuffed dinosaur behind him. Brittany even thanked me in those early months. "I do not know how we would survive without you," she once said while standing in the laundry room folding towels beside me. But gratitude slowly changed into expectation. Then expectation became entitlement. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being treated like a guest and quietly became part of the infrastructure of the house itself. I noticed it in tiny ways first. Nobody asked if I could watch the kids anymore. They simply left schedules on the refrigerator. Grocery lists started appearing on the counter beside my purse. One afternoon, I overheard Brittany talking to her friend Melissa in the kitchen while they drank iced coffee. "Honestly, having Evelyn here saves us thousands," she laughed softly. "Free childcare, free cooking, free cleaning. We hit the jackpot." Melissa asked, "Does she ever complain?" Brittany shrugged. "Not really. She likes feeling needed." I remember standing frozen in the hallway holding a basket of folded towels against my chest while something inside me quietly sank. The hardest part was Daniel. He saw more than he admitted. One night about a year ago, I found him alone on the back porch after everybody else went to bed. The porch light cast long shadows across the yard while cicadas buzzed in the humid dark. He rubbed his forehead and said quietly, "Mom, Brittany gets stressed sometimes. Just try not to take things personally." I looked at my son for a long moment before asking, "Daniel, when exactly did this stop feeling like my home too?" He opened his mouth, like he wanted to answer me honestly. But then the sliding glass door opened behind him, and Brittany called out, "Daniel, are you coming or not?" And just like that, he stood up and walked back inside without answering me at all. Sitting there alone on the porch that night, I remember realizing something painful. The family I thought I was helping had already started building a life that worked better when I stayed quiet. What I still did not understand then was that Robert had spent years preparing for exactly this kind of silence. The next morning, the house smelled like burnt toast and panic. I came downstairs around 7 wearing my old cream cardigan and carrying my tea mug in both hands. Usually by that hour I would already have packed Emma's lunch, signed Lucas's school reading log, and started a load of towels in the laundry room. But that morning, I simply sat down at the kitchen table beside the window and watched the sun come up over the Charleston marsh grass in complete silence. Brittany rushed into the kitchen barefoot, her phone pressed between her shoulder and ear while mascara smudged beneath one eye. "No, Melissa, I swear she usually handles this stuff," she snapped before yanking open the refrigerator. A second later, she looked at me. "Evelyn, did you forget to buy groceries?" I lifted my tea slowly and took a sip before answering. "No. I just did not buy them this time." The kitchen went strangely quiet after that. Daniel walked in adjusting his tie for work, glanced at the empty bread box, then at me. "Mom, Emma needs lunch money today." Normally I would have reached straight for my purse without thinking. That had always been my reflex. Fill the gap, solve the problem, keep the peace moving. But instead, I looked out the window at a white heron, standing perfectly still near the waterline, and said softly, "Then I think her parents should probably give her some." Daniel blinked at me like he genuinely did not recognize the woman sitting across from him. Brittany let out a sharp laugh under her breath. "Wow. Okay. Somebody is in a mood today." I did not answer. And somehow that upset her more than if I had argued back. The silence followed me all day. I spent the morning downtown at the Charleston County Library, volunteering for their annual literacy fundraiser. The old building smelled like paperbacks and polished wood floors, and for the first time in months, I felt useful in a way that had nothing to do with cleaning up after other people. Around noon, the program director, a warm woman named Denise, stopped me beside the donation table. "Evelyn, we just had a board opening unexpectedly. Honestly, I think you would be perfect for it." I stared at her for a second. Me? She smiled. You organized half this fundraiser before 9 in the morning. Yes, you. Something inside me shifted quietly when she said that. Not dramatically, just enough to remind me I still existed outside that house. Later that afternoon, I returned home carrying a small paper bag from a bakery on King Street, lemon scones. One of the few things I still bought just for myself. As I stepped through the front door, I heard Brittany's voice drifting from the dining room. I mean, seriously, she is acting weird ever since that stupid video thing. Melissa laughed through the speakerphone. Maybe she finally realized she is not running the house anymore. Brittany answered with a smug little chuckle. Please, she would never leave. She has nowhere else to go. I stopped in the hallway holding the bakery bag against my coat. For a long moment, I simply stood there listening to my own heartbeat. Then, for the first time in years, I quietly turned around, walked back outside, and drove away instead of going in to clean up somebody else's mess. And as I pulled onto Harborview Road with the windows cracked open against the warm Carolina air, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from a number I had not seen in almost 12 years. It was Robert's attorney. I pulled into the parking lot of a quiet marina cafe just outside Mount Pleasant before answering the call. The late afternoon sun bounced off the water hard enough to make me squint through the windshield. For a moment, I simply stared at the phone vibrating in my hand, while memories of Robert flooded back all at once. He had trusted very few people in this world, but he trusted his attorney, Howard Green, completely. I finally answered softly. Hello? Howard's voice sounded older than I remembered, rougher around the edges. Evelyn, thank goodness. I have been trying to reach you for 2 days. My stomach tightened. Why? There was a pause on the line. Papers shuffled somewhere in the background. Then he said carefully, because someone contacted my office, requesting access to the Parker estate files. I sat perfectly still. Who? Another pause. Your daughter-in-law. The marina around me suddenly felt very far away. I could hear gulls overhead and dishes clinking from the cafe patio, but my chest had gone cold. Howard lowered his voice. She claimed you were becoming forgetful and emotionally unstable. She implied Daniel might need to step in soon regarding financial decisions. I actually laughed once under my breath, not because it was funny, but because the audacity of it almost did not feel real. I see, I whispered. Howard continued carefully. Evelyn, there is more. Someone has also been asking questions about the Charleston Property Trust. My hand tightened around the steering wheel. Robert had created the trust years before he died, after a business partner lost nearly everything during a nasty probate fight. He had spent months organizing paperwork at our dining room table late into the night while explaining every detail to me over cups of coffee. If people ever start circling because they think you are vulnerable, he once told me quietly, you do not explain yourself. You let the paperwork speak for you. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Sitting there in my car all those years later, I realized he had been preparing me for something I never wanted to believe about my own family. When I finally got back home after sunset, the atmosphere inside the house felt strangely tense. The dishwasher hummed loudly in the kitchen, but nobody was talking. Brittany stood near the counter, scrolling through her phone, while Daniel pretended to watch television from the living room recliner. The second I stepped inside, Brittany looked up with one of those overly sweet smiles people use when they are hiding something ugly underneath. There you are, she said lightly. We were starting to worry. I hung my purse by the door. I was out. Daniel cleared his throat awkwardly. Mom, Brittany said you seemed upset lately. Maybe overwhelmed. I looked at him slowly. Did she? Brittany crossed her arms and sighed dramatically. Evelyn, nobody is attacking you. We are just concerned. You have been forgetting things, pulling away, acting emotional. The word emotional landed strangely after 20 years of me being the calmest person in every room. I stared at her for a long moment before asking quietly, and you discussed this with other people? Brittany hesitated just a fraction too long. Daniel finally spoke up. Mom, Melissa mentioned she thought maybe you were struggling a little. I felt something inside me physically drop. Not anger, not even sadness anymore. Just the horrifying realization that Brittany had already started building a version of me for other people to believe. A lonely old woman, confused, dependent, difficult. easier to dismiss than to respect. Brittany stepped closer, lowering her voice into fake concern. Maybe it would help if Daniel started handling more of your financial stuff for you. That was the moment the entire room changed for me. I looked at my son standing there silently beside his wife, while she calmly tried to position herself between me and everything Robert had spent his life protecting. And then I noticed something sitting half hidden beneath Brittany's tablet on the kitchen counter. A folder, cream-colored, stamped with the words Parker Family Trust across the top. The next few days felt strangely artificial inside the house, like everybody had silently agreed to perform normalcy, while something rotten spread underneath the floors. Brittany suddenly became overly polite in front of Daniel. "Evelyn, do you want tea?" she would ask with a tight smile that never reached her eyes. Or she would pat my shoulder lightly in front of neighbors and say things like, "We are just trying to make sure she does not overdo it these days." The words sounded caring if you did not listen too closely, but I had started listening very carefully. 2 mornings later, I found an envelope outside my bedroom door written in Daniel's handwriting. Inside was a folded sheet of notebook paper. "Mom, I think everybody is just stressed right now. Brittany means well. Maybe if we all communicated better, things would calm down." That was all it said. No apology. No acknowledgement of what they were trying to do. Just another request for me to absorb discomfort quietly so nobody else had to feel guilty. I folded the note neatly and placed it in my nightstand beside Robert's old watch. Later that afternoon, my phone rang while I was watering herbs on the back patio. It was Melissa. We had only spoken a handful of times over the years, mostly at birthday parties or school events. Her voice sounded overly cheerful. "Hey, Evelyn, I just wanted to check on you." I looked out across the yard at Emma's abandoned scooter, lying sideways in the grass. "That is kind of you," I answered carefully. Melissa lowered her voice. "Brittany mentioned you have been struggling lately, forgetting things, pulling away from the family." There it was again. The same narrative moving quietly from person to person, like smoke under a door. I gripped the watering can harder. "I am doing just fine, Melissa." She laughed awkwardly. Of course. I just know these things can get hard at your age." After we hung up, I sat alone on the patio for nearly an hour, listening to the hum of traffic somewhere beyond the neighborhood trees. By evening, another message arrived, this time from Daniel. "Mom, maybe it would reassure Brittany if you met with somebody about stress or memory issues, just to clear the air." I stared at the screen until it dimmed in my hand. It was not concern anymore. It was positioning, soft language wrapping around something much uglier underneath. That night, I quietly opened my email inbox and searched for the Parker estate documents Howard had sent years ago. Buried deep in an old folder, I found scanned copies of trust agreements, property protections, financial directives, all signed carefully in Robert's sharp, square handwriting. Attached to one message from Howard was a note Robert had dictated shortly before his surgery 11 years earlier. "If Evelyn is ever pressured regarding the estate, all authority remains solely hers, unless medically declared otherwise by independent evaluation." I read that sentence 3 times. Then I looked toward the bedroom door, while muffled laughter floated upstairs from Brittany and Daniel's room. They thought they were preparing me for dependence. They did not realize Robert had prepared me for betrayal. Around 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed again. A text from Brittany. "We should probably discuss transitioning financial oversight soon. It would take pressure off you." I did not answer. Instead, I walked quietly through the dark kitchen, noticing for the first time how invisible I had become in my own life. The dishwasher was full because I had not unloaded it. Laundry baskets overflowed upstairs because I had stopped touching them. Crumbs sat untouched across the counter. Nobody thanked me when things ran smoothly, because nobody noticed the labor until it disappeared. I stood alone at the sink, staring into the black reflection of the window over the faucet, and for the first time since Robert died, the loneliness inside that house felt heavier than grief itself. 3 days later, Robert's birthday came and went without anyone in the house mentioning it. I did not remind them. I did not bake the coconut cake he loved or set out the little framed photograph I usually kept near the kitchen window every October. I simply carried his old leather wallet upstairs to my room and sat quietly on the edge of the bed while rain tapped softly against the slanted roof above me. For 38 years, Robert had never once forgotten my birthday, Not even during the years when money was tight and Daniel was little and we were counting quarters for groceries. One year he drove nearly 60 miles during a thunderstorm just to replace the lemon pie I accidentally dropped before dinner. Some things matter because they matter to you, he had told me while standing soaked in the doorway, holding that pie box against his chest like treasure. I kept hearing that sentence in my head all morning. Downstairs, life moved on without pause. Brittany argued with the cable company over speakerphone, while Emma cried because nobody had washed her soccer uniform. Daniel rushed around searching for clean dress shirts before work. Every sound drifted upward through the floorboards, while I sat there realizing something painful. They had not just stopped seeing me. They had stopped noticing me entirely. Unless they needed something. Around noon, Daniel knocked lightly on my door. "Mom?" I opened it halfway. He looked exhausted. Dark circles sat under his eyes, and his tie hung loose around his neck. "Have you seen my navy blue work shirts?" For a second, I almost answered automatically. Second drawer left side, that was the old version of me. The woman who solved every inconvenience before anybody else even felt it. Instead, I said quietly, "I have not done laundry this week." Daniel blinked slowly. "Right." He stood there, awkwardly rubbing the back of his neck. "Things just feel tense lately." I looked at him for a long moment before asking softly, "Daniel, when your father was dying in the hospital, do you remember what he asked me to promise him?" His forehead tightened slightly. "No." I swallowed carefully. "He asked me not to disappear, trying to keep everybody else comfortable." Daniel looked away almost immediately. "Mom, nobody is asking you to disappear." The sadness that hit me then was strangely calm, because he truly believed that. He had become so used to my labor, my patience, my emotional cushioning, that he could no longer recognize the absence of care as neglect. After he left, I sat alone beside the window, watching rainwater slide down the glass in crooked lines. My phone stayed silent all afternoon except for a reminder from the pharmacy and a promotional email from the grocery store. No family calls, no check-ins, no one asking if I was all right. Even the grandchildren had started adapting to the new atmosphere in the house. That evening, I overheard Emma whispering to Lucas upstairs. "Do not ask Grandma. Mommy said she gets upset now." I closed my eyes when I heard that. Not because it hurt, although it did, but because I suddenly understood how easily a person can become rewritten inside their own family if nobody challenges the story being told about them. Brittany had not screamed at me or thrown me out. She had done something quieter and far more dangerous. She had slowly reframed my exhaustion as instability and my silence as weakness until even the people closest to me stopped questioning it. Around 9 that night, I finally opened the small cedar chest at the foot of my bed where I kept Robert's personal papers. Beneath old insurance folders and faded photographs sat a sealed envelope in his handwriting. My name was written carefully across the front. Evelyn. Private. I stared at it for nearly a full minute before slowly sliding one finger beneath the flap. And for the first time in months, something inside me no longer felt defeated. It felt awake. Inside the envelope was a letter dated 4 months before Robert died. The paper smelled faintly like cedar and old ink. I sat beside the lamp in my small room, reading every line slowly, while the rest of the house slept. "Evelyn," it began. "If you are reading this, then it probably means you have spent too much time shrinking yourself for people who mistake kindness for permission." I had to stop reading for a moment after that. Robert knew me too well. He always had. The letter was not dramatic or sentimental. It was practical, almost gentle. He reminded me where every account was kept, which attorney to trust, which properties remained protected under the estate structure, and which decisions legally belonged to me alone. Near the bottom of the final page, one sentence sat underlined in blue ink. "You are allowed to build a life that does not revolve around being useful to other people." The next morning, I got dressed before sunrise and drove downtown while the streets of Charleston were still quiet and silver with fog. I stopped at a small diner near Broad Street and ordered eggs, wheat toast, and coffee just for myself. Nobody interrupted me. Nobody asked me where anything was. Nobody needed me to solve some small household crisis before 8 in the morning. I sat there listening to soft jazz from the restaurant speakers while steam curled from my coffee cup and realized how long it had been since I had simply existed without serving someone else. After breakfast, I walked straight into the county library and accepted the board position Denise had offered me. She smiled warmly across the conference table. I had a feeling you would say yes eventually. I surprised myself by smiling back. I think I forgot I was still capable of beginning new things. Over the next few weeks, my routines quietly changed. 3 mornings a week, I worked with the literacy program helping adults prepare for certification exams. On Thursdays, I attended board meetings in a restored brick office overlooking the harbor. I bought myself 2 new blouses that were not chosen for practicality or stain resistance. I even cut my hair shorter for the first time in nearly 15 years. One afternoon, Emma stared at me while I gathered my purse near the front door. "Grandma, where are you going now?" she asked. I knelt beside her gently. "To work, sweetheart." Her little forehead wrinkled. "But you are always here." The innocence in her voice nearly broke my heart because it reminded me how completely my role had narrowed inside that house. Brittany noticed the changes too, although she tried not to show it at first. One evening, she walked into the kitchen while I was reviewing board documents at the table. "You seem busy lately," she said carefully. I looked up from the papers. "I am." She crossed her arms lightly. "The house has been harder to manage lately." There was no accusation in her tone this time, only strain. I nodded once. "Yes, I imagine it has." For the first time in a very long while, I did not rush to soften the discomfort for her. Daniel watched all of this quietly from the sidelines. Some nights I caught him studying me with a strange expression, almost like he was trying to remember who I had been before. Grief and obligation slowly folded me into the background of his life. One Saturday morning, I came downstairs wearing navy slacks and carrying a folder under my arm when Daniel looked up from the couch. "You are heading out again?" he asked. "I am giving a presentation this morning," I answered while slipping on my coat. "At the Literacy Center," he blinked slowly. "You are speaking?" I almost smiled at the surprise in his voice. "I used to speak at conferences all the time before your father retired." Daniel looked genuinely unsettled by that information, like entire pieces of me had existed outside his awareness for years. As I stepped out onto the porch, the warm ocean breeze moved softly through the palmetto trees, and for the first time in a long time, the future no longer felt like something closing in around me. It felt like something quietly opening. By early November, my days barely resembled the life I had been living only a few months earlier. I was no longer waking up with a knot already sitting in my chest before sunrise. Instead, I woke up to my own routines. Quiet coffee in a ceramic mug I bought myself downtown. Soft instrumental music playing while I reviewed literacy program schedules at the kitchen table, before anyone else in the house came downstairs. The work at the center grew faster than I expected. Denise started introducing me differently at meetings. "This is Evelyn Parker, our new community outreach director." The first time I heard the title spoken aloud, something inside me straightened a little. Not pride exactly, more like recognition. Like a part of myself I had not seen in years was finally walking back into the room. They even gave me a small brass nameplate for my desk overlooking the reading hall. Evelyn Parker, Community Outreach Director. I ran my fingertips across those engraved letters the first morning it arrived. Such a small thing, but after years of being reduced to what I could provide inside one household, seeing my own name attached to something that belonged entirely to me felt strangely emotional. One afternoon after a fundraising luncheon, a younger volunteer named Claire stopped me near the elevator. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." She smiled nervously. "How do you stay so calm when everybody else is overwhelmed?" I almost laughed softly at that. If she only knew. "You learn eventually," I answered gently. "That panic usually comes from trying to hold together things that were never yours to carry alone." Claire nodded slowly, like she wanted to remember that sentence later. At home, the atmosphere had shifted in quieter ways too. Brittany no longer barked requests across rooms because I had stopped responding to them automatically. Daniel had started doing grocery runs himself on Saturdays, although he still wandered the aisles like a man solving a complicated math problem. One evening, I came downstairs wearing a navy blazer from the literacy center with my ID badge clipped neatly near the collar. Emma looked up from the couch and smiled brightly. "Grandma, you look important." I smiled back. "I am important, sweetheart." The words surprised even me a little, not because they were arrogant, but because I finally believed them. Brittany glanced over from the kitchen island where she was scrolling through bills. "You have been gone almost every evening this week," she said carefully. There was no accusation left in her voice anymore, mostly uncertainty. I hung my coat over the chair. "The holiday literacy drive is coming up." Daniel looked over from the dining table. "The newspaper mentioned your program this morning." I paused. "It did?" He nodded slowly. "Your name was in the article." Later that night, after everyone went upstairs, I searched for the piece online. There I was in a small photograph standing beside stacks of donated books with a soft smile on my face. The caption read, "Community Outreach Director Evelyn Parker expands adult literacy initiative across Charleston County." I stared at that image for a long moment because the woman in it looked steady, capable, alive, not invisible, not fragile, certainly not confused. And for the first time, I realized something important. The more I rebuilt myself outside that house, the harder it would become for anyone to rewrite me inside it. My phone buzzed softly against the table then. A new email notification appeared across the screen. Sender, Howard Green. Subject line, Estate review complete. I slowly opened the message while the house settled into silence around me, and as I began reading the first paragraph, I realized the timeline Brittany thought she was controlling had already started turning against her. 2 days after Howard's email arrived, I found myself sitting in his downtown Charleston office for the first time in over a decade. The building overlooked the harbor, all dark wood trim and quiet carpeted hallways that smelled faintly like coffee and old paper. Howard looked older now, thinner. His silver hair sat neatly combed back as he adjusted his glasses and spread several folders across the conference table between us. "Evelyn," he said gently, "before we go any further, I need you to understand something clearly." I folded my hands in my lap and waited. Howard slid one document toward me. "Robert protected you far more aggressively than you realized." Outside the tall windows behind him, cargo ships drifted slowly through the gray water while my heartbeat stayed perfectly calm. Howard explained everything carefully. The trust did not just protect financial assets. It controlled the Charleston property itself, the investment accounts attached to it, and several long-term holdings. Robert never discussed openly with Daniel because he worried about financial immaturity and outside influence. The estate was structured to prevent coercion, Howard said quietly, including family coercion. I looked down at Robert's signature near the bottom of the paperwork and suddenly understood why Brittany had become so interested in my mental state. If she could position me as unstable, confused, or dependent, she could eventually push Daniel toward legal oversight conversations. Slowly, respectably, quietly. Howard leaned back in his chair. "There is something else you should know." He opened another folder. "Your daughter-in-law requested an informal consultation with another attorney 3 weeks ago regarding conservatorship procedures." I stared at him without speaking. The room suddenly felt very still. "Did Daniel know?" I asked softly. Howard hesitated just long enough to answer the question before he even spoke. His name was mentioned during the inquiry. I lowered my eyes to the polished table surface while a strange calm settled over me again. Not shock anymore. Clarity. All those soft conversations about stress, memory, responsibility. None of it had been random. They were laying emotional groundwork long before they understood the full legal reality standing behind me. When I returned home later that evening, rain clouds hung low over the neighborhood, and the house glowed warm behind the front windows. Through the glass, I could see Brittany setting dishes on the dining table, while Daniel helped Lucas with homework. For one brief second, the scene almost looked normal, comfortable, safe. Then I stepped inside, carrying my leather folder against my side, and everything shifted. Brittany looked up first. "Oh good, you are home," she said carefully. "We were talking about Thanksgiving plans." Her eyes flicked briefly toward the folder in my hand. Daniel noticed it too. "What is that?" he asked. I removed my coat slowly before answering. "Estate documents." The room went completely quiet after that. Even the children looked up from the table. Brittany forced a small smile. "Why are you reviewing all of that now?" I met her eyes calmly. "Because I finally realized how important it is to understand exactly who controls what." Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Mom, nobody is trying to take anything from you." I looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "Then why did your wife ask an attorney about conservatorship procedures?" The color drained from Brittany's face so fast it was almost frightening. Daniel turned sharply toward her. "What?" Brittany immediately straightened. "It was just a conversation. I was worried about her." Her. Not Mom. Not Evelyn. Her. Like I was already becoming a case file instead of a person. I walked calmly past them into the dining room and placed the folder gently on the table beside the untouched plates. The rain tapped softly against the windows while nobody moved. Then I slowly opened the top document, looked directly at Daniel, and said quietly, "Before either of you says another word tonight, there is something your father never told you about this house." Daniel stared at me across the dining room table, while rain slid slowly down the windows behind him. Brittany had gone completely still beside the kitchen island, one hand tightening around the edge of the marble countertop hard enough for her knuckles to pale. I carefully removed a single document from the folder and laid it flat beside the salt shaker. "Your father never transferred ownership of this property to anyone," I said calmly. "Not to me, not to you, not to the trust." Daniel frowned. "Then who owns it?" I met his eyes steadily. "The Parker Preservation Foundation." Silence settled heavily across the room. Even the children sensed something serious had shifted and quietly disappeared upstairs without being asked. Brittany blinked first. "What foundation?" Her voice sounded smaller now, less polished. I folded my hands lightly together. "A private educational foundation Robert created before he died. It funds literacy programs, scholarships, and historical preservation projects throughout Charleston County." Daniel looked genuinely confused. "Mom, why would Dad do that?" I answered carefully. "Because he spent years watching families destroy themselves over property and inheritance. He wanted this home protected from greed, manipulation, and dependency." Brittany let out a sharp breath. "So what does that even mean?" I looked directly at her. "It means this house was never designed to become somebody's personal asset." Daniel leaned forward slowly. "Wait, are you saying nobody inherits it?" "Correct." Brittany stared at me in disbelief. "That is insane." I shook my head softly. "No, it is disciplined." The dishwasher hummed quietly behind us, while rain tapped against the roof in soft, uneven rhythms. Daniel rubbed both hands down his face. "Then why are we even living here?" There was no anger in his voice anymore, only disorientation. "Because I approved a family residency agreement years ago after your father passed," I said. "Temporary occupancy, conditional upon my discretion." Brittany's head snapped toward me. "Conditional?" I reached into the folder again and slid another document across the table. "Utilities, property taxes, insurance, maintenance. Every single payment tied to this house has continued through accounts controlled exclusively by me." Brittany stared at the paperwork while color slowly drained from her face all over again. "No," she whispered under her breath. "That cannot be right." I tilted my head slightly. "You never thought to ask who was actually sustaining this household financially?" Daniel finally picked up the papers with trembling hands. I watched his eyes move line by line through account statements, signatures, foundation clauses, attorney certifications. Every few seconds, he looked back at me like he was seeing an entirely different person sitting at the table. "Mom," his voice cracked slightly, "you have been paying for almost everything?" I answered simply, "Yes." Brittany immediately stepped forward. "Well, maybe because you wanted control." The accusation sounded weak even to her own ears. I remained calm. Control does not look like quietly feeding, housing, and supporting people for years without asking for recognition. Brittany opened her mouth again, but no words came out this time. Daniel slowly lowered the documents onto the table. Why did Dad never tell me any of this? For the first time that evening, my chest tightened a little. because he worried that if people believed this house belonged to them someday, they might stop valuing the people inside it. Nobody spoke after that. The room felt unbearably still. Then Brittany glanced toward the folder one more time and noticed another document tucked beneath the foundation paperwork. Her eyes narrowed immediately. "What is that?" she asked quietly. I looked down at the final page, still resting inside the folder. Howard had placed it there that afternoon before I left his office. Signed. Notarized. Effective immediately. I gently lifted the document into my hands and looked back up at them both. "That," I said softly, "is the revised residency agreement your father prepared years ago for exactly this situation." The paper felt strangely light in my hands, considering how heavily it landed in the room. Daniel stared at the signature line near the bottom, while Brittany stood frozen beside the kitchen island, with both arms wrapped tightly around herself. I spoke quietly, because there was no need to raise my voice anymore. After Robert's surgery, he updated the residency agreement through Howard's office. The amendment was triggered if anyone attempted to challenge my competency, interfere with a state authority, or pressure me regarding financial control. Daniel looked pale now. "Mom, we were not trying to hurt you." I met his eyes carefully, maybe not intentionally, but you were willing to believe I had become weak before you were willing to ask whether I had become exhausted. The words settled hard between us. Brittany finally stepped forward. "This is unbelievable. You are making us sound manipulative when we were only trying to protect the family." I slid the document across the table toward her. "Then read the clause highlighted on page 4. She hesitated before picking it up. I watched her eyes move across the text, while the kitchen clock ticked softly behind us. Halfway down the page, her expression changed. 90 days? She whispered. Daniel immediately grabbed the paperwork from her hands. "What does that mean?" I answered calmly. "It means the residency agreement can be terminated within 90 days if the environment becomes emotionally coercive or financially exploitative toward me." Daniel looked stunned. "You would ask us to leave?" I held his gaze steadily. "I have not made that decision." Brittany let out a sharp breath. "So we are supposed to live here wondering if you are going to throw us out?" For the first time all evening, I allowed a little steel into my voice. "Do you know what is interesting, Brittany? For months, I lived here wondering when the people around me stopped seeing me as fully capable of controlling my own life." She opened her mouth to argue, then stopped herself. Because somewhere underneath all her defensiveness, she knew exactly when it had happened too. Upstairs, I could hear Emma's bedroom door creak open softly. The children were listening. That realization seemed to hit Daniel all at once. He lowered the papers slowly and rubbed one hand over his face. "God," he muttered quietly, "what have we done?" The sadness in his voice finally sounded real. Not defensive, not performative, just tired and ashamed. I looked at my son and saw the little boy who used to wait by the front window for Robert to come home from work every evening. The same boy who once cried for an hour when he accidentally stepped on a bird's nest in the backyard. He had not become cruel exactly. He had become passive. And passive people often let stronger personalities decide what is acceptable, until one day, they wake up surrounded by damage they helped create through silence. Brittany sat down slowly at the table now, her confidence visibly cracking for the first time since all of this began. "I never thought," she started quietly before trailing off. I answered honestly, "I know. That was part of the problem." Nobody spoke for several seconds after that. Rain still tapped softly against the windows, while the house settled around us in little nighttime creaks. Finally, I pushed the folder closed and stood up. "Starting tomorrow," I said gently, "things are going to change." Daniel looked up immediately. "How?" I picked up my tea mug from the counter. "The way healthy boundaries always change things. Slowly, clearly, honestly." Brittany swallowed hard. "Are you leaving?" I paused before answering because the truth was more complicated than either of them realized. "No," I said softly, "but I am done disappearing inside this house." Then I turned toward the stairs and walked quietly back to my room while the two of them remained sitting at the table beneath the warm kitchen lights, surrounded by paperwork that had finally forced them to see me clearly again. But even then, deep down, I think all three of us understood something painful. Recognition alone does not automatically repair what years of quiet neglect slowly break apart. The months that followed were quieter than I expected. Not magically healed, not perfectly resolved, just quieter in an honest way. Daniel and Brittany stayed in the house through the remainder of the residency agreement, but the atmosphere changed completely after that night at the dining table. Conversations became more careful, boundaries became visible. Daniel started contributing financially for the first time without being reminded. Brittany stopped speaking about me like I was a fragile inconvenience floating around the edges of the household. There were still awkward silences sometimes, still moments when years of resentment brushed against years of guilt. Healing, I learned, does not arrive all at once like a movie ending. It comes slowly through repetition, through accountability, through the small daily choice to stop pretending unhealthy things are normal. By spring, I moved into a beautiful little condo near Sullivan's Island with pale blue shutters and a screened porch that faced the water. The first morning I woke up there, I sat barefoot with my coffee wrapped between both hands while seabirds drifted low across the shoreline and sunlight spilled across the wooden floorboards. No tension humming through the walls. No pressure to hold everybody together. Just peace. Simple, quiet peace. I still saw the children every week. Emma liked helping me water herbs on the porch now, and Lucas always begged me to make grilled cheese sandwiches exactly the way I used to. Daniel came by alone sometimes too, older somehow, softer. One afternoon while we sat watching the tide roll in, he finally said the words I think he had been carrying for months. "I did not realize how much of yourself you disappeared for us." I looked out at the water for a long moment before answering quietly. Neither did I. Brittany never became warm exactly, but over time she became respectful. And honestly, at this stage in life, I learned those are not always the same thing. One evening before leaving my condo, she paused near the door and said softly, "I think I spent so much time trying to control everything around me that I stopped seeing people clearly." I appreciated the honesty more than an apology rehearsed too late. The truth is, family wounds are rarely caused by one terrible moment. Most of the time, they happen slowly, through assumptions, through entitlement, through silence, through years of one person shrinking, while everybody else gets comfortable taking up space. If there is one thing this experience taught me, it is this. Love without boundaries eventually becomes exhaustion. And exhaustion has a way of making good people disappear little by little until they no longer recognize themselves. Please hear me when I say this. If you are constantly sacrificing your peace to keep everyone else comfortable, that is not kindness anymore. That is self-erasure. Protect your finances. Protect your name. Protect your emotional well-being. Trust your instincts when something inside you starts whispering that a relationship no longer feels balanced. God gave us intuition for a reason. Sometimes, the quiet discomfort in your chest is not anxiety. Sometimes it is truth asking you to finally pay attention. And if you are listening to my story tonight while sitting alone in your kitchen, your bedroom, your car, or somewhere feeling invisible inside your own family, I want you to know something deeply important. Your value does not decrease because other people became too distracted, selfish, or emotionally immature to recognize it properly. You do not have to earn dignity by overgiving until there is nothing left of you. You are already worthy of respect simply because you exist. Thank you for staying with me through this story. Truly. There is something comforting about knowing people across the world still care about honesty, healing, and quiet strength. My name is Evelyn Parker. I am 67 years old, and the core lesson I want to leave with you is this. The moment you stop abandoning yourself to keep others comfortable is often the moment your real life finally begins. Before I go, if this story spoke to your heart in some way, I would love for you to leave a comment, sharing where you are watching from and what part of this story stayed with you the most. And if you would like to hear more stories about family, boundaries, healing, and finding yourself again after betrayal, there are more waiting for you in the playlist, right here on this channel. Some of them may feel painfully familiar. Some may help you see your own life differently. And maybe, somewhere in one of those stories, you will recognize a piece of yourself that deserves to come back home too. As for me, every morning now, I still drink my coffee out on that little screened porch facing the ocean. And beside my chair sits Robert's old leather wallet, worn soft with time, resting quietly in the sunlight, like a reminder that the people who truly love you will never ask you to disappear in order to be worthy of staying.